What if I told you that a man who died nearly 2,000 years ago once described a world eerily similar to our modern era down to the flying machines, instant communication across vast distances, and cities lit by artificial light? Centuries before Leonardo da Vinci sketched his first flying machine, before the first telegraph wires crossed continents, and long before the glow of electric bulbs brightened our nights, an ancient philosopher named Roger Bacon envisioned a future that would one day become our present. And here's the unsettling truth: he wasn't alone. History is littered with predictions so precise, so startlingly accurate, that they blur the line between foresight and prophecy. These weren't vague hunches or lucky guesses. They were detailed, almost surgical visions of things that hadn't been invented, events that hadn't yet unfolded, and discoveries still centuries away. That spine-tingling feeling you're experiencing right now, that's the same thrill historians get when they stumble upon these uncanny glimpses into the future, buried in old manuscripts, faded letters, or forgotten speeches. From political figures who foresaw their own assassinations with chilling accuracy, to scientists who mapped out technological breakthroughs they'd never live to see, these predictions defy logic. How could someone like Jules Verne, writing in the 1800s, describe the moon landing with such astonishing detail, down to the number of astronauts and the splashdown location in the Pacific? Or take Nikola Tesla, who dreamed up wireless communication while the rest of the world was still relying on telegraph poles. These weren't just imaginative leaps, they were blueprints for reality. But here's what's even more fascinating: these predictions didn't just come true by accident. They reveal something profound about human intuition, the patterns of history, and the strange ways progress unfolds. Over the next 30 revelations, we're going to unravel the most jaw-dropping cases, each one a puzzle piece in the grand mystery of foresight. Some will make you question whether time is as linear as we think. Others will leave you wondering if certain minds were tapping into something beyond explanation. And by the end, you might start looking at today's bold predictions a little differently. Because if history teaches us anything, it's that the future has a habit of catching up to the visions of those who dared to see it first. So lean in close, we're about to uncover truths that feel less like history and more like magic. Long before the Wright brothers took flight at Kitty Hawk, another mind was already sketching the future of human aviation, not on blueprints but on the pages of a 500-year-old notebook. Leonardo da Vinci's flying machines weren't just idle doodles. They were meticulously detailed designs, complete with rotating blades, wing structures, and even control mechanisms, concepts so advanced for the 15th century that his contemporaries dismissed them as the ramblings of a dreamer. Yet today, when you see a helicopter's rotor cut through the sky or watch an airplane tilt its wings mid-flight, you're seeing Leonardo's imagination made real. Take his aerial screw, for instance, a whirligig of canvas and wood that looks uncannily like a modern helicopter, or his ornithopter, a flapping wing device inspired by birds, which aerospace engineers now credit as an early precursor to winged flight. What's chilling isn't just that he got the shapes right. It's that he understood the principles. He wrote about air resistance, weight distribution, and even predicted the need for lightweight materials, scribbling notes like, "The bird is an instrument working according to mathematical law." In an era when most believed flight was reserved for angels, Leonardo was reverse engineering nature itself. But here's what's haunting: these sketches weren't just speculative. They were functional. Modern engineers have reconstructed his designs using materials available in his time, and some actually work. His parachute design, a pyramid of linen and poles, was tested in 2002 and proved so effective, one researcher remarked it gave a smoother descent than some modern versions. So how did a man born in 1452 visualize machines that wouldn't exist for another 400 years? Some say it was his obsessive study of birds and water flow, revealing hidden laws of physics. Others argue it was his ability to think beyond the limits of his time, a mind unshackled by the word impossible. Yet for all his genius, Leonardo's flying machines were left to gather dust in notebooks labeled as fantasy. His patrons wanted battle tanks and canal systems, practical tools for war and commerce, not visions of a distant future. It makes you wonder how many other leap-ahead ideas have been lost because they arrived too soon. Because the world wasn't ready to see them, Leonardo's story isn't just about prediction, it's a warning about how often we dismiss what we don't yet understand. And perhaps that's the real lesson tucked between those ancient pages. The future belongs to those who dare to sketch it first, even if no one believes them yet. Decades before the first liquid-fueled rocket even left the drawing board, a French novelist was already scripting humanity's first lunar adventure down to the splashdown coordinates. In 1865, Jules Verne published From the Earth to the Moon, a story so packed with precise technical details that NASA engineers would later double-check their own plans against it. His fictional spacecraft, the Columbiad, wasn't just a vague fantasy. It was a 900-pound aluminum-clad projectile carrying 3 astronauts, eerily mirroring the real-life Apollo capsule's weight, material, and crew size a full century later. But the parallels don't stop there. Verne's launch site, Florida, his fictional space gun located near Tampa, sent the Columbiad skyward just miles from where Cape Canaveral would eventually stand. Even the trajectory matched. Verne's crew splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, precisely where Apollo 11's command module would bob on the waves after its historic mission. And here's the kicker, he even calculated the cost of his fictional moonshot at 12 billion francs, which, when adjusted, aligns spookily close to NASA's actual budget. Critics once waved this off as coincidence, but Verne's method reveals something deeper. He didn't just guess, he consulted astronomers, studied physics, and crunched numbers obsessively. His descriptions of weightlessness, the cold void of space, and even the emotional impact of seeing Earth from afar read like mission debriefs. When Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface, he might as well have been following a script written 104 years prior. So was Verne a time traveler, a prophet? More likely, he was a master of extrapolation, connecting the dots of 19th century science to envision its logical endpoint. But that's the unsettling beauty of his prediction. It proves how much of the future lies hidden in the present, waiting for someone with the vision to piece it together. And it begs the question, what other fiction from the past is still waiting to become our reality? While the world was still marveling at the crackle of Morse code through telegraph wires, one man was already dreaming of a future where information would flow invisibly through the air, connecting every corner of the planet. Nikola Tesla, the eccentric genius who lit up the world with alternating current, saw beyond the limits of his era, envisioning a network so vast and instantaneous, it would make the telegraph look like a child's toy. In 1901, he scribbled in his notebooks about a system that could transmit voice, text, and even images across continents without wires. Sound familiar? He was describing the internet decades before the first computer was built. Tesla's vision wasn't just vague speculation. He built Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island, a monstrous structure designed to beam electricity and data through the Earth itself. Critics laughed, calling it a million-dollar lightning machine, but Tesla insisted it could one day deliver news, music, and even personal messages to handheld devices. He called these futuristic gadgets pocket receivers, a dead ringer for today's smartphones. And here's the chilling part. His experiments with high-frequency waves and global resonance laid the groundwork for technologies like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and even GPS. What set Tesla apart wasn't just his technical brilliance, it was his understanding of humanity's deepest hunger. He predicted a world where knowledge would be free and accessible to all, where a farmer in Iowa could converse with a scholar in Tokyo. In a 1932 interview, he mused, "When wireless is perfectly applied, the whole Earth will become one vast brain." Today, as we scroll through social media or video call someone halfway across the globe, we're living in the ecosystem Tesla imagined. Yet in his lifetime, financiers like J.P. Morgan pulled funding, dismissing wireless communication as a pipe dream. They wanted profit, not prophecy. So why did Tesla's wireless revolution stall? Some blame his lack of business savvy. Others point to industrial rivals like Edison and Marconi, who prioritized short-term gains over Tesla's soaring visions. But perhaps the real tragedy is that he simply thought too far ahead. The world wasn't ready to see what he saw, a lesson that echoes through history. After all, the future doesn't arrive on schedule. It waits for the rest of us to catch up to the minds who have already been there. Mark Twain once joked that he came into this world with Halley's Comet in 1835 and expected to go out with it when the comet returned, a prediction so oddly specific that it sent chills down the spines of those who knew him. But this wasn't just a passing comment made in jest. Twain fixated on the idea, mentioning it repeatedly in speeches and letters over the years, almost as if he sensed a cosmic appointment written in the stars. And then, on April 21, 1910, one day after Halley's Comet reached its brightest point in the night sky, Twain took his last breath. The timing was so perfect, so unnervingly precise, that even the most skeptical biographers admit it defies mere coincidence. What makes this story even stranger is Twain's own awareness of the prophecy's weight. In 1909, he told his close friend, the writer Albert Bigelow Paine, "The Almighty has said, no doubt, now here are these two unaccountable freaks. They came in together, they must go out together." It's almost as if he saw his life as part of some grand celestial symmetry, a narrative bookended. The same fiery wanderer streaking across the sky. Halley's Comet only graces Earth's skies once every 75 years, yet Twain's birth and death aligned with its visits like clockwork. But was this really just luck, or did Twain, with his razor-sharp wit and deep fascination with fate, somehow orchestrate his own exit to match the prophecy? Some argue his famously frail health in his final years made the timing inevitable. Others point out that Twain had been bedridden for months before his passing, yet he clung to life just long enough to fulfill his own prediction. Whether by cosmic design or sheer force of will, the man who spun tales of time travelers and mysterious strangers became part of history's greatest coincidences. Twain's story lingers in our minds because it blurs the line between destiny and determination. Did he predict his death, or did he, in some way, choose it? His life was filled with uncanny foresight, from political satire that predicted modern scandals to letters hinting at inventions decades before they existed. But the comet prophecy stands apart, not just because it came true, but because Twain himself seemed to embrace it as part of his legend. It's a reminder that sometimes truth isn't just stranger than fiction, it's more poetic than anything we could dream up. And perhaps that's the real mystery here, not whether the stars foretold Twain's fate, but whether he knew all along how to make his final bow unforgettable. Years before uranium fission was even discovered, and decades before mushroom clouds would darken the skies over Hiroshima, a British writer penned a description of atomic warfare so precise that it would later haunt the scientists who built the first real bomb. In 1914, as Europe descended into the chaos of World War I, H.G. Wells published The World Set Free, a novel featuring atomic bombs that could level cities, leave radioactive wastelands in their wake, and trigger global arms races. The similarities to the Manhattan Project's grim achievements aren't just eerie, they're downright unsettling. Wells didn't just coin the term atomic bomb. He envisioned the geopolitical nightmare it would unleash. His fictional weapons were dropped from airplanes, ignited chain reactions, and forced nations into uneasy truces mirroring the Cold War's mutually assured destruction doctrine before World War II even began. But here's where it gets chilling. His bombs weren't powered by conventional explosives. He described a process where atoms of an unstable element, he called it carolinum, were deliberately split to release energy. Sound familiar? It's a dead ringer for nuclear fission, a concept physicists wouldn't prove for another 25 years. The most jarring twist in this story isn't Wells' foresight, it's who was reading it. In 1932, a young Hungarian physicist named Leo Szilard stumbled upon the novel while sitting on a London park bench. The passage describing atomic energy's potential struck him like lightning. Years later, after realizing a nuclear chain reaction was scientifically possible, Szilard would recall Wells' book as the spark that set his mind ablaze. By 1939, he'd co-write the letter to President Roosevelt signed by Einstein that launched the Manhattan Project. In a twist of history, fiction had blueprinted reality. Critics might argue Wells simply extrapolated from early radioactive experiments by Marie Curie and Ernest Rutherford, but his predictions went beyond science. He foresaw the ethical quagmire, how atomic weapons would hand humanity the power to annihilate itself. His characters grappled with the same moral dread Oppenheimer voiced after the Trinity test. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. So was Wells a prophet or just a visionary with a knack for connecting scientific dots? Perhaps both. His genius lay in recognizing that every breakthrough carries a shadow. The scientists who turned his fiction into fact didn't just prove him right, they confirmed his darkest warning, that the future belongs to those who dare to imagine it, for better or worse. And that's the real lesson lurking in the pages of The World Set Free. Not just how accurately one man predicted the bomb, but how desperately we need to foresee the consequences of the next world-changing idea before it's too late. Edgar Allan Poe wasn't just a master of horror, he was a man who seemed to peer into the darkest corners of human desperation decades before reality caught up. In 1838, he published the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, a grotesque tale of a shipwrecked crew adrift at sea, starving, until they drew straws to decide who would be sacrificed and eaten. It was shocking fiction until 46 years later, when history delivered an almost identical nightmare. The Mignonette, a yacht bound for Australia in 1884, sank in the South Atlantic, leaving 4 men stranded in a lifeboat for weeks. When cabin boy Richard Parker, yes, the same name as Poe's fictional victim, fell into a coma from dehydration, the others made a grim decision. They killed him. They ate him, and when rescued, they stood trial in a case that would redefine the limits of survival and morality. The parallels between Poe's story and the Mignonette tragedy are so precise, they feel like fate mocking reality. Both involved a doomed vessel, a life raft adrift under a scorching sun, and a victim named Richard Parker, who was the youngest of the group. Poe's fictional crew even used the same method of drawing lots, a detail the real-life survivors claimed was their own agonizing invention. But here's what chills legal scholars. The Mignonette case didn't just mirror Poe's plot. It forced the world to confront the very questions he'd raised about what humans become when pushed beyond civilization's edge. The court's verdict that necessity wasn't a defense for murder echoed the moral horror Poe had woven into his tale. Was this prophecy or morbid coincidence? Poe's inspiration likely came from earlier maritime disasters, like the Essex whaling ship sunk by a sperm whale in 1820, a story that also inspired Moby Dick. But his genius lay in distilling humanity's primal fears into fiction so vivid, it became a blueprint for real-life horror. The Mignonette survivors insisted they'd never read Poe's novel, which only deepens the mystery. How does a writer conjure a scenario so specific it unfolds decades later with the same gut-punching details? Perhaps the answer lies in Poe's understanding of the human psyche under duress. His story wasn't just about cannibalism, it was about the unraveling of societal norms, the moment when hunger and thirst erased the lines between morality and survival. The Mignonette case proved he wasn't exaggerating. When the lifeboat's captain, Tom Dudley, confessed, "I prayed for forgiveness as I did it," he might as well have been quoting one of Poe's tormented characters. That's the real power of Poe's prediction. It wasn't just about foreseeing an event, it was about exposing the fragile veneer of civilization. The Mignonet trial became a landmark in jurisprudence, debating whether law could account for the unimaginable. Poe, ever the Gothic visionary, had already given us the answer in Ink and Shadow. When pushed to the brink, humanity's darkest instincts don't just emerge, they follow a script written long ago. And sometimes that script comes from the nightmares of a writer who saw the abyss before the rest of us dared to look. 14 years before the RMS Titanic slipped beneath the frigid Atlantic waves, a struggling American author named Morgan Robertson penned a story that would later make historians question the boundaries between fiction and fate. His 1898 novella Futility told the tale of the Titan, the largest ocean liner ever built, a vessel deemed practically unsinkable by its designers. Packed with wealthy elites, it sped through iceberg-infested waters on its maiden voyage, only to strike ice and founder with tragic loss of life. Sound familiar? The parallels between Robertson's fictional disaster and the Titanic's sinking in 1912 are so numerous, they border on the supernatural. Start with the names Titan and Titanic, both evoking mythic invincibility. Both ships were British-owned, triple-screw steamers stretching nearly 800 feet long, touted as the pinnacle of maritime luxury. Both carried far too few lifeboats for their passenger capacity due to overconfidence in their unsinkable design. Even the collision details match. At night in April near Newfoundland, while traveling at high speed despite iceberg warnings, Robertson even got the death toll eerily close. His fictional sinking claimed nearly everyone on board, while the real Titanic lost around 2/3 of its passengers. But here's what shakes the skeptics. Robertson didn't just predict a shipwreck. He described the cultural conditions that made it inevitable. His Titan was a symbol of hubris, a floating monument to Gilded Age excess, where first-class passengers dined on opulent meals while the ship's crew ignored safety protocols. Replace Titan with Titanic, and you've got White Star Line's real-life gamble cutting costs on lifeboats to maximize deck space for luxury suites, racing to set a transatlantic record despite known ice hazards. Robertson's story wasn't just a freakish coincidence. It was a critique of blind faith in progress, a warning about the arrogance of assuming technology could defy nature. After the Titanic sank, Robertson faced accusations of clairvoyance or insider knowledge. He denied both, claiming he'd simply studied maritime trends. As shipbuilders competed to construct ever larger liners, collisions with icebergs were a known risk. 35 had been recorded in the decades before his book. Yet the precision of his narrative still unsettles. He even described the Titan's steel hull as double-bottomed, a feature the Titanic's engineers later boasted would prevent catastrophe. When reality proved them wrong, Robertson's fiction became a grim punchline, proof that sometimes the loudest warnings come disguised as entertainment. So was this prophecy or just a lucky guess? The answer might lie in Robertson's own life. A former sailor, he understood the sea's indifference to human ambition. His story didn't predict the future, it exposed a pattern. Disasters rarely happen in isolation. They're the endpoint of ignored risks, cut corners, and the dangerous belief that bigger means safer. The Titanic's tragedy wasn't just an accident. It was a collision between human arrogance and the unforgiving laws of physics, a collision Robertson had already mapped out in chilling detail. And that's the real lesson here. Sometimes the most accurate predictions aren't about what will happen, but what must happen when we stop respecting the forces we can't control. Long before the swastika banners unfurled over Berlin, and decades before the world would shudder at the name Adolf Hitler, a French apothecary scribbled verses so cryptic they'd ignite debates for centuries. Nostradamus, the 16th century seer whose quatrains have been dissected like no other prophecies in history, seemed to foreshadow the rise of a figure chillingly reminiscent of the Fuhrer. One line in particular, written in 1555, speaks of a great trembling leader emerging near the Danube using the Latinized term hister. To modern ears, the resemblance to Hitler is jarring, especially when paired with references to iron cages and innocents drowned, phrases some link to the Holocaust's horrors. But here's where the mystery deepens. Hister wasn't a fabrication. It was an archaic name for the Danube River's lower stretch, a region where Hitler spent formative years. The quatrain continues, "He will come to tyrannize the land," with warnings of children torn from mothers. Could these fragments really point to the Third Reich's atrocities, or are we forcing history into a poetic Rorschach test? Scholars are sharply divided. Critics argue that Nostradamus's verses were deliberately vague, designed to withstand endless reinterpretation. After all, his writing brims with symbolic language, references to eagles, lions, and celestial signs that could apply to countless conflicts across 5 centuries. Yet there's an unnerving pattern. Another quatrain mentions a man with a mustache who would cause a great people to tremble, a description that, post-World War II, seemed to fit Hitler's iconic appearance and impact. Even more striking, Nostradamus wrote of a time when 2 brothers will be torn apart by chaos, a line some connect to the ideological rift between Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia despite their initial pact. The debate hinges on perspective. Nostradamus's defenders claim his predictions were encrypted to avoid persecution, a necessity in an era when heresy could mean execution. They point to his accuracy elsewhere, like foreshadowing the Great Fire of London and the French Revolution. Skeptics counter that these hits are survivorship bias. We remember the lines that seem to align and forget the hundreds that don't. Perhaps the most compelling evidence isn't in the text itself, but in its afterlife. The Nazis themselves weaponized Nostradamus during World War II, distributing pamphlets with his prophecies to demoralize Allied troops by suggesting their defeat was preordained. It's a chilling irony. A centuries-old verse, possibly unintentional, became propaganda for the very regime it might have predicted. So was Nostradamus a true visionary, or are we seeing patterns that weren't there? The answer may lie in the nature of prophecy itself. Predictions aren't static, they're mirrors, reflecting the anxieties and obsessions of each era that rediscovers them. Whether Nostradamus glimpsed Hitler or not, his enduring power lies in how his words force us to confront a darker truth, that history's worst chapters rarely come without warnings. The real question isn't whether he saw the future, it's why we so often ignore the signs until it's too late. While the world was still lit by gas lamps and powered by coal, one inventor was already dreaming of a future fueled by sunlight itself, and he wasn't some fringe theorist. Alexander Graham Bell, the man who brought us the telephone, stood before an audience in 1914 and declared something astonishing. The sun's rays will be the coal of the future. At a time when fossil fuels seemed limitless, Bell saw their expiration date. He sketched designs for crude solar panels, imagining rooftops coated with selenium cells that could convert light into electricity. To his peers, it sounded like science fiction. Today, those sketches look like blueprints for our renewable energy revolution. Bell's vision wasn't just a passing thought, it was rooted in hard science. Years before his solar prediction, he'd been experimenting with photophones, devices that transmitted sound on beams of light. His research revealed something profound. Sunlight wasn't just warmth or brightness, it was an untapped river of energy. In his notebooks, he calculated how much power could be harvested if just a fraction of the desert's sunlight was captured, figures that aligned startlingly close with modern solar farm outputs. But here's what's even more remarkable. Bell anticipated the social impact of solar energy. He argued it would democratize power, breaking the grip of utility monopolies by letting homes generate their own electricity. Sound familiar? That's the exact ethos driving today's rooftop solar boom. Yet for all his foresight, Bell's solar dream hit a wall of practicality. The materials of his era, bulky selenium plates, were hopelessly inefficient, converting less than 1% of sunlight into usable energy. Without funding or public interest, the idea faded into obscurity. It would take another 60 years for scientists to develop silicon-based photovoltaic cells, the technology that finally made Bell's vision viable. So why does this prediction matter now? Because Bell's story isn't just about being right, it's about the cost of being early. Like Leonardo da Vinci's helicopters or Tesla's wireless dreams, his solar panels were a glimpse of a future the world wasn't ready to build. Today, as solar farms sprawl across deserts and Tesla's Powerwall batteries store sunlight for nighttime use, Bell's prophecy feels less like a prediction and more like a roadmap we're finally following. But here's the twist: we're still catching up to his broader vision. Bell didn't just imagine solar panels, he imagined a world where energy was clean, decentralized, and accessible to all. A world where the sun, not coal barons or oil cartels, kept the lights on. As climate change forces us to reckon with the legacy of fossil fuels, Bell's words from over a century ago ring louder than ever. The future he saw isn't just possible, it's inevitable. The only question is how long it will take us to fully wake up to the light he tried to show us. At the dawn of the 20th century, when most homes still relied on horse-drawn carriages and handwritten letters, a civil engineer named John Elfreth Watkins sat down to imagine a world that wouldn't exist for another 100 years. His article, published in the December 1900 issue of Ladies' Home Journal, wasn't just speculative fiction. It was a meticulously reasoned forecast that nailed inventions we now take for granted. Under the headline, "What May Happen in the Next 100 Years," Watkins sketched out a future where photographs would be telegraphed from any distance, in full color, where wireless telephone networks would allow people to chat across continents, and where trains would rocket between cities at 150 miles per hour. To his contemporaries, these ideas must have sounded like pure fantasy. Today, they read like a checklist of modern life. What sets Watkins apart from other futurists wasn't just his accuracy, it was his method. Unlike mystics or poets, he approached prediction like an engineer, extrapolating from existing technologies. He'd witnessed the rise of trains and telegraphs, so he imagined their logical evolution: faster, smaller, more connected. His description of digital color photography sprang from early experiments with color filters and the rapid advancement of film. His wireless telephones built upon Marconi's recent breakthroughs in radio transmission. Even his vision of high-speed trains mirrored the trajectory of steam engines, which had already slashed travel times. Watkins wasn't guessing, he was connecting dots the rest of the world hadn't yet seen. But here's where his predictions get uncanny. He didn't just foresee the existence of these technologies, he anticipated their cultural impact. He wrote that mobile communication would make the world feel smaller, erasing the isolation of rural communities. He argued that fast trains would turn distant cities into suburbs, creating sprawling, metropolitan regions. Most strikingly, he predicted that these advances would come with a cost: a faster, more frenetic pace of life. People will be rushed more than ever. He warned an observation anyone scrolling through social media on their morning commute might find painfully relatable. Yet for all his foresight, Watkins missed a few key things. He assumed the automobile would remain a luxury item, never envisioning highways choked with traffic. He thought dirigibles, not airplanes, would dominate the skies, and his belief that mosquitoes and houseflies will be exterminated feels almost comically optimistic in hindsight. But these misses make his hits even more remarkable. They prove he wasn't just regurgitating popular fantasies of the era. He was thinking critically, testing the boundaries of what seemed possible. The real lesson of Watkins' predictions isn't that he was some oracle. It's that the future often unfolds in plain sight, hidden in the incremental steps we overlook. When he wrote, "A man will be able to carry one in his pocket," describing a device eerily similar to a smartphone, he was simply extending the logical arc of miniaturization already underway. The magic lies in his ability to recognize those arcs while others dismissed them as impossible. So the next time someone dismisses a bold prediction as wishful thinking, remember Watkins. The future doesn't always arrive with a bang, sometimes it creeps in, one logical step at a time, waiting for sharp minds to piece it together. And the most startling visions often turn out to be those grounded not in fantasy, but in the quiet observation of progress already in motion. In 1661, while most scientists were still debating whether air had weight and how maggots spontaneously appeared in rotten meat, a man named Robert Boyle was quietly drafting a wish list for the future. Not predictions, not prophecies, but 24 specific inventions he hoped humanity would one day achieve. The Irish chemist, best known for Boyle's law on gas pressure, filled his private notebooks with concepts so advanced they read like a catalogue of modern miracles. Near the top of that list, the prolongation of life through medical science, a dream that's since become reality with vaccines, antibiotics, and organ transplants. Then there was his hope for the art of flying, scribbled 2 centuries before the Wright brothers left the ground. But what makes Boyle's list truly extraordinary isn't just its accuracy, it's the granular details that reveal a mind far ahead of its time. Take his entry on the cure of diseases at a distance, a concept that sounds suspiciously like telemedicine or even targeted radiation therapy. Or his hope for the transmutation of species, a phrase that could easily describe today's genetic engineering breakthroughs. He imagined the making of artificial minerals, foreshadowing synthetic diamonds and lab-grown gemstones. Even his offhand mention of the emulating of fish without engines conjures images of modern submarines gliding silently through the deep. These weren't vague musings, they were concrete challenges he believed science could solve given enough time. What's haunting is how Boyle framed these ideas. Unlike Nostradamus's cryptic verses or Verne's fictional adventures, Boyle presented his list as a call to action. He titled it Desiderata, Latin for things desired, and urged future thinkers to pursue them systematically. In an era when alchemists still sought to turn lead into gold, Boyle was mapping out the real frontiers of discovery. His confidence in science's potential was staggering. He wrote that the power of man may infinitely exceed what it now is, a radical notion in an age where average life expectancy barely reached 40. Yet there's a bittersweet irony here. Boyle himself never lived to see a single item on his list realized. He died in 1691, leaving behind scribbled hopes that would take centuries to materialize. That's the real tragedy of foresight. Visionaries often plant trees whose shade they'll never enjoy, but perhaps that's also the lesson tucked between Boyle's lines. Progress isn't about one lifetime, it's about passing the torch. Every MRI machine, every gene editing tool, every commercial flight tracing contrails across the sky, they're all answers to a challenge thrown down by a man who dared to dream bigger than his world allowed. Boyle's legacy isn't just that he predicted the future, it's that he trusted us to build it. In an age of superstition and dogma, he bet on reason, collaboration, and the slow, steady march of knowledge. And in doing so, he proved something profound. The line between science fiction and science fact isn't drawn by time. It's drawn by curiosity and the courage to write down what seems impossible, then hand the list to those who'll prove you right. Long before Donald Trump descended a golden escalator to announce his presidential run, a cartoon family from Springfield was already laughing at the idea. In an episode titled Bart to the Future, which aired in March 2000, The Simpsons dropped a throwaway joke that would later send chills down the spines of political commentators. The plot, a flash forward to Lisa Simpson becoming president, inheriting a nation left in financial ruin by her predecessor. And who was that predecessor? None other than Donald Trump, described in the episode as the worst president ever. At the time, it seemed like classic Simpsons absurdity, a billionaire reality TV star turned commander-in-chief. Ridiculous. Cut to 16 years later, and the joke wasn't just prophetic, it was ripped from headlines the writers never saw coming. But this wasn't the show's first brush with eerie foresight. The Simpsons has a track record of predictions so precise, they've spawned conspiracy theories about time-traveling writers. In 1993, an episode featured a villainous billionaire buying Fox Broadcasting, a move that mirrored Rupert Murdoch's real-life takeover years later. Another episode from 1997 showed Lisa holding a Grammy Award that looked suspiciously like the one Taylor Swift would win in 2010. Even the infamous three-eyed fish from the Springfield River, a gag about nuclear pollution, found its real-world counterpart near an Argentine nuclear plant in 2016. The list goes on: the Ebola outbreak, autocorrect disasters, Disney's acquisition of Fox, all joked about on The Simpsons years before they happened. So how does a satirical cartoon keep pulling this off? The answer lies in the show's secret weapon. Its writers aren't psychics, they're cultural archaeologists. Many were Harvard-educated mathematicians and scientists who approached comedy like a lab experiment, dissecting societal trends and extrapolating their most outrageous endpoints. Trump's presidency wasn't a wild guess, it was an observation about America's growing obsession with celebrity culture and the blurring line between entertainment and politics. As early as the 1980s, Trump was positioning himself as a tabloid fixture, a walking metaphor for excess and self-promotion. The Simpsons writers simply took that trajectory to its logical extreme. Yet there's a darker layer to these predictions. The show's accuracy isn't just a testament to its writers' brilliance, it's a reflection of how often society follows the same cynical patterns. When The Simpsons predicts a disaster, it's usually because the groundwork for that disaster was already laid. The three-eyed fish gag worked because environmental negligence was rampant. The Trump joke landed because the idea of a celebrity president was bubbling under the surface of American culture. The show's genius lies in holding up a funhouse mirror to reality, one that often ends up being less distorted than we'd like to admit. That's the real lesson behind The Simpsons' uncanny foresight. It's not about seeing the future, it's about recognizing the absurdity barreling toward us in the present. And perhaps that's why these predictions feel so unsettling. They're not warnings from some distant oracle. They're reminders that the seeds of tomorrow's headlines are already here, buried in the jokes we laugh at today. The question isn't whether The Simpsons will predict the next big thing, it's whether we'll recognize the punchline before it becomes reality. George Orwell's 1984 wasn't just a novel, it was a warning etched in ink, a nightmare so vividly rendered that its shadows stretch into our modern world with unsettling clarity. Written in 1949, Orwell's dystopia envisioned a society where screens watched citizens in their homes, where history was rewritten on a whim, and where a figurehead known as Big Brother wielded control through perpetual war and psychological manipulation. At the time, critics dismissed it as exaggerated satire, but flip through its pages today, and you'll find passages that read less like fiction and more like a playbook for the digital age. Take the telescreens, Orwell's two-way surveillance devices that blared propaganda while monitoring every twitch and whisper in a room. Sound familiar? The rise of smart speakers, always listening voice assistants, and cameras embedded in doorbells and phones has transformed our homes into something eerily close to Orwell's vision. Even the casual way we trade privacy for convenience mirrors the citizens of Oceania, who accept surveillance as the price of security. But here's where it gets chilling. Orwell predicted not just the technology, but its psychological toll. His characters live in a state of constant self-censorship, policing their own thoughts out of fear. In an era of data breaches and social media algorithms that track our keystrokes, that paranoia doesn't feel so far-fetched. Then there's the Ministry of Truth, Orwell's sinister department dedicated to rewriting history to fit the party's narrative. Books are edited, photos are doctored, and dissenters vanish, their very existence erased from records. Compare that to today's deepfake technology, where AI can fabricate videos of world leaders saying things they never uttered, or the way social media bubbles allow alternate facts to flourish. Orwell's memory hole, a chute where inconvenient documents are destroyed, finds its counterpart in the ephemeral nature of digital information, tweets deleted, articles memory hold, and news cycles that move so fast, yesterday's scandal is forgotten by dawn. But perhaps the most jarring parallel is Newspeak, the stripped-down language designed to make dissent impossible by eliminating words for rebellious ideas. It's a concept that feels uncomfortably relevant in an age of algorithmic content moderation, where certain phrases trigger shadow bans or where euphemisms sanitize harsh realities. When governments rebrand civilian casualties as collateral damage or corporations reframe layoffs as right-sizing, the spirit of Newspeak lingers. Orwell understood that power isn't just about controlling actions, it's about controlling the very language people use to describe their world. Yet for all its bleakness, 1984 wasn't a prophecy carved in stone. It was a cautionary tale written by a man who'd witnessed totalitarianism's rise firsthand during the Spanish Civil War and World War II. Orwell's genius lay in recognizing that technology doesn't create tyranny, it merely amplifies the human impulses already itching for control. The novel's enduring power isn't that it predicted the future, but that it reminded us how fragile truth and freedom can be when left unguarded. So the next time you dismiss a smart device's privacy warning or scroll past a headline that doesn't fit your worldview, remember, Orwell's nightmare wasn't about inevitability. It was about complacency. The telescreens are here. The question is whether we'll let them become our mirrors or our shackles. In 1945, while most scientists were still struggling to get a single rocket off the ground, a young radar technician named Arthur C. Clarke was already sketching out a network of celestial relay stations, artificial moons that would hover motionless above the Earth, bridging continents with instant communication. His groundbreaking paper, Extraterrestrial Relays, proposed placing satellites in what we now call geostationary orbit, a precise altitude of 22,236 miles where an object's speed matches Earth's rotation, locking it permanently over one spot on the equator. To his peers, it sounded like something from a pulp sci-fi magazine, but Clarke wasn't just daydreaming, he was solving a problem that hadn't yet fully materialized. At the time, intercontinental communication relied on undersea cables and shortwave radio, both riddled with limitations. Cables were expensive to lay and maintain, while radio signals were prone to atmospheric interference. Clarke's solution: position 3 satellites equidistant along the equator, each acting as a mirror in space to bounce signals across the globe with perfect clarity. He even calculated the exact orbital mechanics, proving it wasn't just theoretical, it was inevitable. What's staggering isn't just that he envisioned satellites before Sputnik, but that he imagined their purpose: global television broadcasts, real-time news relays, and even the potential for a businessman in New York to dictate to his secretary in London. Sound like Zoom calls and live-streamed press conferences? That's because Clarke was sketching the blueprint for our hyper-connected world. The real magic of this prediction lies in its precision. Clarke didn't just suggest objects in space, he defined their orbital sweet spot down to the mile, a zone now officially designated the Clarke orbit by astronomers. When SYNCOM-3 became the first geostationary satellite in 1964, beaming the Tokyo Olympics to American televisions, it parked itself right where Clarke said it should. Today, over 400 satellites occupy this belt, enabling everything from GPS navigation to emergency weather alerts. Your smartphone pings off them. Your favorite shows stream through them. Even this video likely reached you via a path Clark mapped out decades before the technology existed to walk it. Yet for all its brilliance, Clark's vision faced skepticism. Critics argued rockets would never be powerful enough to reach such high orbits, or that signal delays would render the system useless. What they underestimated was Clark's dual genius, equal parts scientist and storyteller. As the author of 2001, A Space Odyssey, he understood that technological leaps require imagination as much as engineering. His satellites weren't just tools, they were stepping stones toward a greater idea, that humanity's future lay in transcending Earth's boundaries, the irony. Clark never patented his concept, publishing it openly in Wireless World magazine. In his words, no one believed it was possible until it happened. That's the hallmark of true foresight, not just seeing the future, but giving it away freely, trusting others to build it, and build it we did. Every time you video call someone overseas or check a live traffic map, you're touching a piece of Arthur C. Clarke's 1945 daydream. The man who gave us geostationary satellites also gave us a lesson. The future belongs to those who dare to plot its coordinates first, even if the world isn't ready to follow yet. Nearly 2 centuries before climate strikes and carbon footprints entered public consciousness, a French writer peered into the Industrial Revolution's smoky heart and saw the poison lurking within its progress. Émile Souvester's 1846 novel The World as It Shall Be wasn't just another utopian fantasy. It was a chilling autopsy of a future strangled by its own industry. While contemporaries celebrated factories as marvels of modernity, Souvester imagined a Paris choked by smog, rivers boiling with chemical waste, and forests reduced to stumps under axes wielded by greed. His fictional 2030 was a grotesque carnival of excess, where technological advancement came at the cost of breathable air and drinkable water. Today, as microplastics seep into Antarctic ice and wildfires rage where ancient trees once stood, Souvester's satire reads less like fiction and more like a field manual for our planetary crisis. What sets this prediction apart isn't just its accuracy, it's the specificity of Souvester's nightmares. He described black snow falling from polluted skies, a phenomenon now documented in industrial regions like Siberia's Kuzbass coal basin. His characters wheezed through air thick with fuliginous vapors, anticipating modern asthma epidemics linked to particulate matter. Most eerily, he envisioned corporations peddling synthetic foods as natural resources vanished, a haunting parallel to today's lab-grown meat startups and vanishing fisheries. These weren't vague ecological musings, they were systematic consequences of a world that valued profit over planetary health. Yet Souvester's real genius lay in tracing pollution's social fallout. His fictional society didn't collapse under biblical plagues. It adapted, institutionalizing environmental decay as the new normal. The wealthy retreated to domed citadels with filtered air while the poor choked on fumes outside. Governments peddled absurd solutions like perfumed masks to sweeten toxic air rather than curb emissions. Sound familiar? It's the same dystopian logic driving modern debates about climate apartheid and carbon offset greenwashing. Souvester understood that ecological breakdown wouldn't arrive as a single catastrophe, it would creep in, normalized by those who could afford to look away. Critics might argue that 19th-century industrial cities like London and Manchester were already notorious for their pea-soup fogs, making pollution an obvious extrapolation. But Souvester went further. He connected factory smokestacks to species extinction, soil depletion, and even psychological despair, linkages science wouldn't formally establish for another century. His work anticipated Rachel Carson's Silent Spring by over 100 years, not with data but with visceral storytelling that made the abstract tangible. When his protagonist stumbles upon a museum display of extinct animals labeled as casualties of human progress, it's impossible not to think of the dodo or the passenger pigeon. or the 1,000 species now vanishing yearly under our watch. The tragedy of the world as it shall be isn't that Sylvester predicted the future. It's that humanity read his warning as entertainment rather than prophecy. His book sold modestly, praised for its wit but dismissed as hyperbole. Even Jules Verne, who admired Sylvester, later sanitized these themes into adventurous optimism. By the time scientists began quantifying CO2 levels and ozone holes, the machinery Sylvester feared was already irreversible. That's the real lesson lurking in his yellowed pages. Civilization's greatest threats aren't the disasters we fail to predict, but the ones we choose to laugh off until they're too big to ignore. The black snow keeps falling. The question is whether we'll finally brush it off or let it bury us. In 1726, while astronomers were still mapping the visible planets with crude telescopes, a satirist spinning tales of imaginary lands stumbled upon a cosmic truth no scientist had yet uncovered. Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, a book better known for its biting parody of human folly, contained a throwaway detail that would later stump astronomers: a description of Mars having 2 moons. At the time, Earth's moon was the only natural satellite confirmed in our solar system. The idea of Mars possessing companions seemed as absurd as Lilliput itself. Yet 151 years later, when Asaph Hall peered through the U.S. Naval Observatory's telescope in 1877 and spotted Phobos and Deimos, the scientific world realized Swift hadn't just made a lucky guess, he'd nailed specifics no one could have known. Swift's account in Gulliver's Travels is chilling in its precision. The Laputan astronomers, floating on their fictional flying island, boast of discovering 2 lesser stars or satellites which revolve about Mars, one orbiting in 10 hours, the other in 21.5. Compare that to reality. Phobos whirls around Mars every 7 hours and 39 minutes, while Deimos takes 30 hours and 18 minutes. The numbers aren't identical, but the staggering proximity, especially the fact that one moon moves significantly faster than the other, leaves little room for dismissal as pure coincidence. Even more striking, Swift described the inner moon as so close to Mars it would appear motionless from certain points on the planet's surface, a phenomenon modern astronomers confirm with Phobos' synchronous rotation. So how did a writer with no formal training in astronomy land this cosmic bullseye? Skeptics argue Swift borrowed from earlier speculations, like Johannes Kepler's passing suggestion in 1610 that Mars might have moons. Others note that the numbers align a bit too neatly with Earth's moon, hinting Swift might have been scaling down known celestial relationships for satire. But here's the twist: Kepler's guess was purely mathematical, based on his belief that Mars sat between Earth, 1 moon, and Jupiter, which he assumed had 4, based on flawed data. No one before Swift had described the moon's behavior, their speeds, their proximity, their duality. The real key might lie in Swift's razor-sharp critique of scientific arrogance. The Laputan astronomers are pompous fools, obsessing over trivialities while ignoring glaring truths. By having them discover Martian moons, Swift was mocking the era's speculative frenzy. Yet in doing so, he accidentally collided with reality. It's as if his satire pierced through human ignorance, brushing against a truth even science hadn't yet grasped. Perhaps that's why the discovery of Phobos and Deimos unsettled astronomers so deeply, not because Swift predicted their existence, but because he'd done so while laughing at the very institutions that later proved him right. There's a poetic irony in the fact that Mars moons, once dismissed as literary garnish, turned out to be jagged, irregular bodies resembling captured asteroids. They're cosmic underdogs, much like Swift's book, a work of fiction that, against all odds, harbored a fragment of cosmic truth. The lesson here isn't just about lucky guesses. It's about how often truth hides in plain sight, woven into stories we assume are merely fiction. Because sometimes the most profound discoveries aren't made by those staring solemnly through telescopes, but by those with the wit to laugh at the stars while accidentally mapping them. New Yorkers in 1863 could hardly picture their crowded streets sinking underground until an article in the New York Times dared to imagine it. The piece scoffed at a proposal for a subterranean railway, dismissing it as pure fantasy. Who would ever consent to be buried alive under Manhattan just to ride a train? The paper quipped, yet 4 decades later, in 1904, the city unveiled its first subway line, a project that would grow into the very system those skeptical editors had laughed off as impossible. What makes this prediction so fascinating isn't just that the Times got it wrong. It's why they were so certain. The idea of tunneling beneath a bustling metropolis seemed ludicrous in an era when horse-drawn carriages still ruled the streets. Engineers warned of unstable soil, collapsing buildings, and the sheer absurdity of asking people to descend into darkness for transportation. The article even mocked the notion of trains racing like moles beneath Broadway, calling it a mechanical nightmare that defied both logic and dignity. But beneath the skepticism lay a deeper resistance to change, a refusal to believe that urban life could be reshaped so dramatically. Fast forward to opening day, October 27, 1904. Thousands lined up to ride the Interborough Rapid Transit, marveling as their subway cars zipped beneath the city at a then astonishing 35 miles per hour. The very obstacles the Times had deemed insurmountable, the tunneling through bedrock, the ventilation systems to prevent suffocation, the public's willingness to embrace the underground, had all been conquered. And within a year, the subway was carrying over 100 million passengers, proving that convenience could outweigh even the deepest fears of the unknown. The irony, the Times wasn't alone in its skepticism. Similar doubts had plagued London's Metropolitan Railway, the world's first subway, when it opened in 1863, the same year as the skeptical article. Critics warned passengers would faint from lack of oxygen or be terrorized by the unnatural darkness. Yet by the time New York's system launched, London's underground was a thriving success, a fact the Times might have noted had they looked beyond their own assumptions. This story isn't just about a newspaper's failed prediction, it's about how easily innovation gets mistaken for impossibility. The same pattern repeats today, whether it's doubts about self-driving cars or colonies on Mars. Progress has a way of rewriting what we consider feasible, often in the span of a single generation. The Times eventually embraced the subway, of course, even praising its efficiency. But that initial resistance serves as a reminder: the future rarely asks for permission. It arrives whether we're ready or not, leaving skeptics to catch up or risk being left behind on the platform. Long before AirPods became ubiquitous accessories dangling from commuters' ears, Ray Bradbury sketched out their eerie precursor in his 1953 masterpiece Fahrenheit 451. In his dystopian world, where firemen burned books instead of extinguishing flames, citizens wander through life with little seashells nested in their ears, tiny devices pumping out an endless stream of music, news, and chatter, drowning out meaningful human connection. At the time, portable radios were bulky contraptions carried on shoulders, and the idea of wireless, in-ear audio seemed as fantastical as the novel's robotic hounds. Yet today, as we glance around any subway car or jogging path, Bradbury's seashells stare back at us in the form of sleek wireless earbuds, their silicone tips sealing listeners into private sonic universes. What makes Bradbury's prediction so unsettling isn't just the physical resemblance, it's the social critique woven into the design. His seashell radios weren't neutral gadgets, they were tools of mass distraction, keeping citizens numb to the censorship and conformity around them. Characters like Mildred, the protagonist's wife, drift through life in a haze of disconnected murmurs, an expert at lip reading from 10 years of apprenticeship at seashell radio thimbles. The parallels to modern noise-canceling culture are impossible to ignore. Commuters scrolling through feeds while podcasts play, office workers isolating behind playlists, entire conversations replaced by the glow of screens and the hum of personalized soundtracks. Bradbury didn't just foresee a technology, he anticipated how it would reshape human attention, yet the real genius of his prediction lies in the details. The seashells weren't merely headphones, they were wireless, described as thimble-sized objects inserted effortlessly into ears. In 1953, transistors were still novelties, and the first commercial hearing aids weighed half a pound. The idea of a self-contained audio device small enough to nestle in oral canals bordered on witchcraft. Even more striking, Bradbury envisioned these devices as subscription-based services, with characters complaining about the cost of their radio families, mirroring today's streaming platform battles. The seashells weren't passive receivers, they were portals to curated content ecosystems, a concept decades ahead of Spotify algorithms or Patreon-fueled podcasts. Critics might argue Bradbury was simply extrapolating from existing trends, like the rise of portable transistor radios in the 1950s, but his insight went deeper. He grasped that technology's danger isn't in its existence, but in its ubiquity, how seamlessly it could dissolve the boundary between solitude and isolation. When Mildred nearly overdoses on sleeping pills, her seashell still tamps out the world, symbolizing a society that medicates itself with perpetual noise. Modern studies on earbud culture echo this eerily. Research shows heavy headphone users report higher loneliness rates, as if the very devices designed to connect us to media disconnect us from each other. Bradbury's seashells weren't just a lucky guess. They were a warning, one we're still learning to hear beneath the din of our own earbuds. The next time you pop in your AirPods to escape a crowded train or ignore a street performer, consider this: the future isn't just something we invent. It's something we choose, one playlist at a time, and sometimes that choice comes down to whether we'll let the seashells whisper us into complacency or pull them out to listen, truly listen, to the world beyond the thimble in our ears. William Thomas Stead wasn't just a passenger on the Titanic. He was a man who'd already written his own death scene. 14 years before the doomed liner set sail, this crusading journalist penned a chilling short story titled How the Mail Steamer Went Down in Mid-Atlantic. The plot: a luxury steamship collides with an iceberg and sinks, its catastrophic loss of life blamed on insufficient lifeboats, but Stead didn't stop there. In 1892, he doubled down with an even more explicit tale, From the Old World to the New, where a White Star Line vessel, yes, the same company that owned Titanic, rescues survivors from a ship struck by ice. These weren't just fictional exercises. Stead attached grim commentary, warning that such a disaster was inevitable unless maritime safety laws changed. His closing words now freeze the blood. This is exactly what might take place, and will take place if liners are sent to sea short of boats. The irony is almost too cruel to comprehend. On April 14, 1912, Stead was playing cards in the Titanic's first-class smoking lounge when the ship grazed that infamous iceberg. Witnesses later reported he helped women and children into lifeboats before retreating to the grand staircase, calmly reading a book as the freezing Atlantic rose around him. His body, like his prophetic stories, vanished into the depths. What makes Stead's foresight so unnerving isn't just the broad strokes, a ship, an iceberg, mass drowning, but the forensic details he got right. His fictional vessels suffered from the same hubris as Titanic: reliance on watertight compartments deemed unsinkable, lifeboat capacity for barely half the passengers, and complacent captains ignoring ice warnings. Even his narrative framing mirrored reality. In From the Old World to the New, a character muses that such disasters only prompt reform after they've scorched the very hearts of the public. True to form, Titanic's sinking revolutionized maritime safety, mandating lifeboats for all and establishing the International Ice Patrol, a change Stead had begged for in print decades earlier. Yet there's a darker layer here. Stead wasn't merely predicting disaster, he seemed drawn to it. Friends recalled his obsession with premonitions, his belief that great truths often arrived wrapped in tragedy. In 1912, just before boarding Titanic, he told a colleague, "I feel as if something is going to happen and I have to be there." Some dismiss this as hindsight embellishment, but his writings suggest otherwise. A man who'd stared so long at the abyss, he recognized its silhouette when it finally came for him. Stead's story forces a haunting question. When does foresight become fate? Did he will his vision into being by fixating on it? Or was he simply one of those rare minds that perceive the fault lines in human arrogance before they rupture? Perhaps the answer lies in his own words, scrawled years before the iceberg loomed out of the dark. "We know the risk and we take it. The price of progress is paid in lives." A price he, like so many others, would ultimately settle with his own. In 1899, as the first sputtering automobiles still shared roads with horse-drawn carriages, a French cartoonist named Albert Robida unleashed a prophetic ink and paper nightmare. His illustration Car Troubles didn't just depict cars, it foresaw the chaotic psychology of car culture itself. Amid a tangled snarl of vehicles, drivers screamed at each other, fists raised, while pedestrians scrambled for safety. One particularly enraged motorist brandished a walking stick like a weapon, his face twisted in road rage, a term that wouldn't enter dictionaries for another century. Robida's vision wasn't just satire, it was sociology in cartoon form, capturing a future where streets designed for hooves and buggies would buckle under the weight of machines and human impatience. What makes Car Troubles so eerily accurate isn't just its traffic gridlock. It's the emotional combustion Robida embedded in the scene. His cartoon predated Los Angeles's first major traffic jam by 3 decades, yet he somehow grasped how metal boxes moving at speed would amplify our basest instincts. The details are uncanny: a cyclist flipping off a driver, a pedestrian shaking their umbrella in fury, even a dog barking at the chaos. These weren't generic madmen, they were archetypes of the stressed commuter, the aggressive tailgater, the overwhelmed city dweller. Figures now immortalized in dashcam videos and highway patrol reports. Robida didn't just predict cars, he predicted how they'd reshape human behavior. The genius of his satire lies in its specificity. While most futurists of his era obsessed over horsepower and engineering, Robida zoomed in on the experience of driving. The frustration of being stuck behind a slow vehicle. His cartoon includes a steam-powered jalopy belching smoke, the territorial battles over right-of-way, even the class tensions hinted at by a top-hatted aristocrat sneering at a working-class driver. These nuances mirror today's realities, from hybrid owners fuming behind diesel trucks to luxury cars bullying compact vehicles into merging lanes. His cartoon essentially invented the concept of road karma long before anyone had a bumper sticker to advertise it. Yet Car Troubles wasn't purely pessimistic. Buried in the chaos is a darkly humorous truth that humans would adapt to this new chaos, however poorly. The pedestrians in his cartoon aren't frozen in terror. They're dodging and weaving with the practiced reflexes of New Yorkers navigating today's crosswalks. The drivers, for all their rage, are still moving forward, inch by inch, proving that society would find a way to function amid the madness. It's a sentiment anyone stuck in rush-hour traffic might grudgingly recognize. The system is broken, but somehow we keep making it work. Robida's real legacy isn't just that he foresaw traffic jams. It's that he understood technology's double edge. Cars promised freedom but delivered congestion. They shrunk distances but expanded tempers. His ink-stained prophecy reminds us that progress rarely unfolds as cleanly as we hope. The asphalt jungles we navigate today, with their honking symphonies and brake-light ballets, are exactly the future he sketched in 1899. The only difference, we're the ones white-knuckling the steering wheel, living inside the cartoon he drew from pure imagination. And that's the unsettling power of Robida's Car Troubles. It wasn't predicting a distant future. It was holding up a mirror to the frustrations we'd one day call normal. The year was 1934, decades before silicon chips or binary code entered the public lexicon. when popular mechanics dropped a bombshell prediction that must have read like science fiction. A mechanical brain that thinks, remembers, and even learns from its mistakes may revolutionize civilization. The article declared, describing a machine that could store vast amounts of information and solve complex problems autonomously. To readers in the Great Depression, this idea likely seemed as fantastical as moon colonies or time travel. After all, the most advanced computers of the era were room-sized contraptions filled with gears and punch cards, capable only of basic arithmetic. Yet scribbled between those ink-smudged pages was a shockingly accurate blueprint for artificial intelligence, written at a time when even the concept of digital storage was pure speculation. What makes this forecast so staggering are the specifics. The article didn't just vaguely imagine thinking machines. It described components eerily similar to modern AI architecture. It spoke of memory units storing data indefinitely, anticipating hard drives and cloud storage. It envisioned machines processing information through logical networks, a dead ringer for neural networks that power today's deep learning. Most remarkably, it predicted these systems would learn from errors, improving over time the foundational principle of machine learning algorithms like GPT or Midjourney. These weren't wild guesses, they were extrapolations from technologies in their infancy, like the differential analyzer, an early mechanical computer that could solve equations. The writer grasped a truth most contemporaries missed. If machines could calculate, why couldn't they someday reason? Yet the real foresight lay in predicting AI's cultural impact. The article warned that these mechanical brains could displace human labor, trigger ethical dilemmas, and even outpace our ability to control them. Debates now dominating headlines about automation and AI ethics. One passage reads, "Who will be responsible when a machine's decision causes harm?" That's not just prescient, it's a direct echo of today's courtroom battles over self-driving car accidents or algorithmic bias. Even the term mechanical brain hints at our modern anxiety about AI consciousness, a topic fueling everything from Terminator sequels to congressional hearings. Of course, the popular mechanics vision wasn't flawless. It assumed these brains would rely on vacuum tubes and magnetic drums, missing the transistor revolution. It underestimated miniaturization, picturing city block-sized complexes rather than smartphones in our pockets, but these misses only highlight how astounding the hits were. To predict AI's essence, its ability to learn, adapt, and unsettle society without the framework of binary code or programming languages, that's like describing a symphony when all you've heard is a single note. The article's true legacy isn't just its accuracy, it's the reminder that breakthroughs often hide in plain sight, waiting for the right minds to connect the dots. Because sometimes the future isn't invented, it's simply recognized long before the world is ready to see it. And as we stand on the brink of AI reshaping everything from art to medicine, that 34 prediction whispers a cautionary tale. The most transformative ideas often arrive first as whispers, dismissed as fantasy, until they rewrite reality itself. While the gramophones of 1909 crackled with the static-laced sounds of Caruso recordings, Nikola Tesla was already dreaming of a world where music floated through the air, untethered by wires, discs, or any physical medium at all. In an interview with the New York Times, the maverick inventor described a future where wireless music boxes would sit in every home, pulling symphonies and operas from the ether with the simplicity of tuning a radio dial. To readers of the era, accustomed to hand-cranked phonographs and live performances, this must have sounded like pure wizardry. Yet Tesla wasn't spinning fantasies. He was reverse engineering the future from the principles of his own groundbreaking work with high-frequency currents. What makes this prediction so extraordinary isn't just its accuracy, but the granular detail Tesla provided. He didn't merely envision wireless audio, he mapped out the entire ecosystem we now call music streaming. His music boxes would be small, affordable devices, democratizing access to culture by eliminating the need for expensive phonograph records or concert tickets. He described a centralized transmitting station, broadcasting multiple channels, essentially predicting playlist algorithms and on-demand services decades before the first jukebox. Most remarkably, he foresaw the social impact. A farmer in his isolated home will enjoy the same advantages as the dweller in the city, he told the Times, anticipating how streaming would erase geographic barriers to art. Tesla's vision sprang from his experiments at Wardenclyffe Tower, where he'd already demonstrated wireless power transmission years earlier. If electricity could travel without wires, he reasoned, why not sound? His notebooks from 1901 reveal sketches of resonant circuits designed to carry audio signals alongside power, a concept now foundational to Bluetooth and Wi-Fi protocols. Had financiers like J.P. Morgan understood the potential, Spotify and Apple Music might have arrived a century sooner. But Wall Street dismissed the idea as impractical, forcing Tesla to abandon his tower and watch as lesser technologies like AM radio co-opted his principles without fulfilling their full potential. The bitter irony, Tesla's prediction came true in ways even he couldn't have imagined. Modern streaming isn't just wireless, it's weightless, with billions of songs condensed into algorithms and bitrates. That farmer he mentioned, today, a shepherd in Mongolia, can live-stream the Vienna Philharmonic on a smartphone, while commuters in Tokyo curate personal soundtracks from 50 million tracks. Yet for all this progress, we've lost something Tesla cherished. His vision wasn't just about convenience, but about elevating humanity through universal access to beauty. Perhaps that's the real lesson hidden in his 1909 interview. The future isn't just about inventing technologies, it's about imagining how they'll shape the human experience. Tesla didn't just give us a blueprint for streaming, he offered a manifesto for what culture could become when unshackled from physical limits. And as we swipe through playlists today, we're not just fulfilling his prediction, we're testing whether we've honored its deeper promise to make music not just wireless but boundless. Picture a world where breakfast cooks itself while you sleep, where dusting and scrubbing happen without a single lifted finger, a world where tireless mechanical hands take over the drudgery of daily chores. That was the future promised in the pages of a 1923 Scientific American article titled "The Robot Servant of the Future," a vision so detailed it might as well have been a product catalog for today's smart homes. Decades before the first microchip was invented, the magazine sketched out humanoid robots gliding through suburban houses, folding laundry with precision arms, and even entertaining children with programmed songs. To readers in the Roaring Twenties, still hand-washing dishes and beating carpets on clotheslines, this must have read like Jules Verne fantasy. Yet hidden between those typewritten lines was something astonishing. A near-perfect blueprint for the robot vacuums, voice-activated assistants, and automated kitchens we now take for granted. What makes this prediction uncanny isn't just its broad strokes, it's the granular details that align with modern robotics. The article described machines with memories to learn household layouts, anticipating the mapping lasers in today's Roombas. It envisioned robots responding to voice commands, a feature now standard in Alexa-enabled devices. Most remarkably, it predicted these servants would be modular, swapping attachments for different tasks, much like the interchangeable tools on premium robotic mops. These weren't generic sci-fi tropes, they were engineering insights disguised as speculation. The real genius of the piece lay in its understanding of human psychology. While most futurists of the era obsessed over industrial robots, hulking arms, welding car frames, this author grasped that the true revolution would happen where people lived. The housewife will be freed from slavery, the article declared, framing automation as liberation rather than replacement. That distinction matters. By focusing on domestic robots, Scientific American tapped into a universal desire: not just for efficiency but for time, a commodity we're still chasing a century later. Yet the prediction wasn't flawless. The article assumed robots would mimic human forms, complete with legs and expressive faces, missing the rise of disembodied AI or wheeled devices like the Roomba. It overestimated our comfort with humanoid machines, witnessed the unease around Boston Dynamics' eerily lifelike creations, while underestimating how subtly automation would creep into our lives. Today's smart homes don't announce themselves with clanking metal butlers. They whisper through thermostats that learn our schedules and fridges that order milk before we realize we're out. The gap between 1923's vision and today's reality reveals an uncomfortable truth about innovation. We often imagine the future as either too much or too little. We picture robot made straight out of the Jetsons but miss the incremental steps, the floor-cleaning discs, the voice-controlled bulbs that quietly reshape daily life. Scientific American got the destination right but missed the winding road we'd take to get there. Still, that 1923 article lingers in the mind like a half-remembered dream. Because when your robotic vacuum zigzags across the floor or your coffee maker brews your morning cup before your alarm goes off, you're living in a future someone dared to sketch with nothing but ink and imagination. And that's the real magic of prediction, not just being right but inspiring others to build what you once only dreamed. In 1956, as black and white televisions flickered in living rooms across America, engineers at Bell Laboratories were already piecing together a technology that would have seemed like pure magic to the average family huddled around their Philco console. Their invention, the picturephone, a clunky, futuristic contraption that promised to let people see each other while they talked across vast distances. At the time, the concept of video calls was so alien that Bell Labs had to produce promotional films explaining how it might be used. One such film showed a businessman checking in with his office while vacationing at the beach, grinning as his secretary's face materialized on a tiny screen. To audiences raised on rotary phones and handwritten letters, this vision was less a prediction than a glimpse into a science fiction future. Yet hidden beneath the picturephone's impractical chrome shell were insights that would define our digital age. The engineers envisioned video calls shrinking from refrigerator-sized units to portable devices, anticipating smartphones by half a century. They grappled with bandwidth limitations eerily similar to today's struggles with zoom lag, experimenting with compression algorithms to squeeze moving images through copper wires. Most remarkably, they predicted video calling's social impact, how seeing a loved one's face during a conversation could ease loneliness, or how doctors might diagnose patients remotely. These weren't just technical hurdles, they were human problems waiting for technology to catch up. The picturephone's public debut at the 1964 World's Fair was a flop. Visitors lined up to gawk at the technology, but few saw its practicality. At $87 per call, equivalent to nearly $800 today, it was a luxury with no clear purpose. Newspapers mocked it as a solution in search of a problem, but Bell Labs' failure wasn't in the idea, it was in the timing. They'd built a rocket before designing the parachute, forgetting that adoption requires more than capability, it needs cultural readiness. Video calling needed cheaper infrastructure, simpler interfaces, and a world knitted together by something the 1960s lacked, the internet. Decades later, as Skype and FaceTime turned video calls into a mundane daily ritual, the picturephone's ghost finally got its due. Those clunky prototypes weren't failures, they were time capsules, proving that even the most outlandish predictions often succeed when the world finally grows into them. The engineers hadn't misjudged the technology, they'd misjudged how long it would take society to embrace seeing through screens as naturally as speaking through them. Today, as we flip between work calls and bedtime stories with grandparents across continents, the real lesson of Bell Labs' experiment isn't about being early or late, it's about the stubbornness of vision. Because every time your phone lights up with a familiar face, You're living in a future those engineers refused to stop believing in, even when the world told them it was impossible. And that's the magic of prediction, not just seeing what's coming, but having the patience to wait for the rest of us to arrive. Back in 1968, as headlines screamed about Vietnam protests and moon landing preparations, a quieter revolution was brewing, one that would slip into wallets and reshape how the entire world spent money. That June, the New York Times ran a prescient article titled "The Credit Card Society," warning of a future where paper cash would vanish, replaced by plastic rectangles that promised convenience at a hidden cost. The writer painted a dystopian scene where every purchase from groceries to gasoline would be tracked, where impulsive buying would spiral, and where personal debt might tighten into an invisible chokehold. To readers still writing checks at the supermarket, this vision seemed absurd. Yet today, as you tap your phone to pay for coffee or scroll through a bank app littered with microtransactions, that 56-year-old prediction reads less like speculation and more like a field manual for our financial lives. What makes this forecast so eerily accurate isn't just the shift from cash to plastic, it's the cultural shifts the article nailed. The piece predicted that credit cards wouldn't merely replace money, they'd alter our relationship with spending itself. The psychological barrier to buying crumbles when no physical currency changes hands. The journalist observed, anticipating the studies that now prove people spend up to 100% more when swiping cards instead of handing over bills. Even more striking, the article warned that cards would create a permanent loan culture where revolving debt became normalized, a prophecy fulfilled by today's average American household carrying over $7,000 in credit card balances. But the real clairvoyance lay in darker details. The Times envisioned a surveillance economy long before data brokers existed, noting that every card swipe would leave a digital fingerprint for corporations to mine. Sound familiar? Modern banks now sell spending habit analyzers to advertisers, while apps like Mint dissect your purchases into colorful pie charts. The article even foresaw the rise of financial exclusion, arguing that cashless systems might lock out the poor who lacked access to credit, a crisis now playing out in urban centers where laundromats and food trucks refuse dollar bills. Yet for all its foresight, the piece missed one glaring irony. The credit card didn't kill cash. It was just the opening act. The true cashless revolution arrived via smartphones and cryptocurrencies, technologies the 1960s couldn't have fathomed. Those plastic rectangles the Times fretted over, they're now relics in a world where your watch can pay for a latte, or where Bitcoin miners validate transactions without a bank in sight. The article's real legacy isn't that it predicted credit cards, it's that it grasped how fragile financial habits are when technology decides to rewrite the rules. So the next time you wave your phone at a checkout terminal, remember, someone saw this coming back when computers filled entire rooms. The future doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it slides into your wallet on a piece of plastic, then quietly rewires everything you thought you knew about money. The unsettling question isn't whether they predicted our cashless world. It's whether anyone truly understood the trade-offs until it was too late to turn back. In 1983, as home computers were still a novelty for most families and dial-up connections screeched at glacial speeds, a British TV report dared to imagine a revolution most viewers dismissed as pure fantasy. The segment, aired on the BBC's Tomorrow's World, showed a woman named Jane using her chunky keyboard to browse virtual store shelves, clicking on groceries that would later arrive at her doorstep. The anchors marveled at this teleshopping concept, explaining how fiber optic cables might one day turn living rooms into digital marketplaces. To audiences accustomed to handwritten shopping lists and Saturday trips to the high street, the idea of groceries materializing from a screen seemed as likely as jetpacks and robot maids. Yet hidden in that grainy broadcast was a vision so precise it could have been a pitch meeting for Amazon Fresh, 30 years before its launch. What makes this prediction extraordinary isn't just the broad concept any sci-fi writer could have imagined mail-order catalogs going digital. It's the granular details the BBC got right. The demonstration featured a graphical interface with product images, a radical notion in an era when most computers displayed only green text on black screens. The hosts described how orders would sync with warehouse systems, anticipating real-time inventory tracking. Most eerily, they emphasized convenience as the driving force, with Jane avoiding crowded stores and long checkout lines, the same marketing angle that would later make online shopping irresistible. This wasn't a vague hunch, it was a fully formed blueprint for e-commerce, drafted when less than 1% of British households even owned a computer. The real genius of the segment lies in its grasp of the psychological shift required. The anchors didn't just explain the technology, they soothed viewers' anxieties about trusting unseen vendors. "How do you know you'll get what you ordered?" one asked, mirroring the skepticism that would plague early adopters of eBay and Amazon. The solution, shown a digital receipt and delivery confirmation, is now standard practice for every online retailer. They even touched on returns, a hurdle modern platforms still wrestle with, proving the BBC team understood that logistics, not just flashy tech, would make or break the revolution. Yet the report wasn't flawless. It underestimated how social shopping would remain, assuming we'd trade bustling markets for solitary screen time. Today, live-streamed shopping events and Instagram storefronts prove humans still crave communal buying experiences. The segment also missed the rise of reviews and algorithms, envisioning a passive browse rather than the hyper-personalized feeds we now scroll. But these blind spots only highlight how astonishing the core prediction was, like someone sketching a smartphone in 1983 but forgetting to add the camera. The bittersweet twist: the system shown actually existed. Called HomeLink, it was a real trial run by British grocery chain Tesco and telecom giant BT. A few hundred households in Hertfordshire could order from local stores using Prestel terminals, clunky precursors to the web. But limited bandwidth and sky-high costs killed the project within years. Like so many premature visions, it was a future the world wasn't ready to pay for. Yet, that's the haunting lesson of this prediction. Innovation rarely fails because the idea is wrong. It fails because the ecosystem infrastructure, trust, affordability isn't ripe. When the BBC aired its segment, the internet was still a military and academic tool. Mobile phones weighed as much as toasters. The pieces wouldn't align for decades, but the visionaries who drafted the roadmap, they weren't foolish. They were simply early, a fate that awaits every radical idea until the world finally catches up to the dreamers who saw it first. Years before Steve Jobs stepped on stage to unveil the first iPhone, before BlackBerries dominated boardrooms, and even before the term smartphone entered the lexicon, a group of engineers at AT&T sketched out a device that would one day redefine modern life. In 1994, a full 13 years before Apple's groundbreaking launch, AT&T filed a patent for what they called a multifunctional handheld device. The description reads like a checklist for every smartphone feature we now take for granted. A touchscreen interface, built-in GPS navigation, a digital camera, wireless internet connectivity, and even the ability to download applications. This wasn't just a rough concept. The patent diagrams show a sleek rectangular gadget with a vibrant display, virtual keyboard, and icons arranged in a grid, a design so familiar today it's almost jarring to see it documented in the era of flip phones and pagers. What makes this prediction extraordinary isn't just its existence, it's the precision with which AT&T anticipated how these technologies would converge. The patent explicitly described using the device for real-time video calls, streaming music, and storing digital books, all while fitting comfortably in a user's palm. Engineers even envisioned a built-in fingerprint scanner for security, a feature that wouldn't become mainstream until the iPhone 6 in 2014. These weren't vague musings, they were meticulously detailed schematics for a tool that would eventually become the central hub of work, communication, and entertainment for billions. Yet here's the twist: AT&T never built it. The company shelved the patent, focusing instead on refining traditional cell networks, while the world remained obsessed with physical keyboards and antenna nubs. Some argue the technology simply wasn't ready. Battery life, processor speeds, and touchscreen responsiveness couldn't meet the vision in 1994. Others suspect corporate hesitation. After all, this same company had previously dismissed cellular technology as a niche product for doctors and executives. Whatever the reason, AT&T's smartphone remained trapped in paperwork while rivals like Nokia and Palm chased incremental upgrades to dumb phones. The real lesson here isn't about missed opportunities, it's about the fragile dance between vision and timing. Inventors often mistake being first with being right. AT&T's engineers saw the destination clearly but lacked the ecosystem to get there. App stores didn't exist, mobile data was painfully slow, and consumers hadn't yet craved a device that could replace their cameras, maps, and wallets. By the time the iPhone arrived in 2007, Wi-Fi hotspots were everywhere, lithium-ion batteries had improved, and the world was primed for disruption. That 1994 patent now stands as a relic of foresight, a reminder that breakthrough ideas often arrive before the infrastructure exists to support them. It's easy to dismiss pioneers who predicted the future but failed to capitalize. Yet every time you tap an Uber icon or scan your face to unlock your phone, you're interacting with a reality AT&T's engineers mapped out decades ago. Their real legacy isn't the device they didn't build, it's the future they dared to document, proving once again that innovation doesn't follow a straight line. Sometimes the most transformative ideas must wait for the world to catch up to them. Back in 2004, long before endless scrolling became the default state of existence, a prescient article in Wired magazine sounded an alarm most readers shrugged off as techno-paranoia. The piece, titled "The Dark Side of Social Connectivity," didn't just predict the rise of Facebook and Twitter, it diagnosed their psychological toll with clinical precision. Writer Daniel Roth warned that these nascent platforms would rewire human attention spans, trading genuine connection for the dopamine hits of constant validation. At the time, MySpace was still a niche playground. Mark Zuckerberg was coding Facebook from his Harvard dorm, and the word influencer hadn't yet escaped marketing boardrooms. Yet buried in that article was a prophecy far darker than any sci-fi dystopia: the quiet erosion of autonomy beneath the weight of likes, shares, and algorithmic whispers. The article's foresight lies not in its broad strokes. Every era fears new technology, but in its surgical specifics. Roth described how social feeds would prioritize outrage and novelty over nuance, creating echo chambers that amplify division. He predicted the rise of performance fatigue, where users craft manicured personas to meet invisible standards, anxiety now quantified by studies linking Instagram use to body dysmorphia. Most chillingly, he flagged the addictive design of infinite scroll, comparing it to slot machines rigged to dispense intermittent rewards. Today, as TikTok's brain hack algorithms face congressional scrutiny and whistleblowers like Frances Haugen expose platforms' internal research on teen mental health, Roth's 19-year-old warning reads like a forensic report on our collective attention crisis. What separates this prediction from Luddite hand-wringing is its source. Wired wasn't some anti-tech manifesto, it was Silicon Valley's cheerleader, a magazine that championed the dot-com boom. Roth's critique emerged from insider interviews with engineers who openly admitted manipulating user behavior. One anonymous designer confessed to tweaking notification colors to trigger urgency, while another boasted about exploiting FOMO, fear of missing out, before the term entered mainstream lexicon. These weren't hypothetical risks, they were blueprints being drafted in real time. Yet the article's true brilliance lies in its unanswered question: why would we surrender so willingly? Roth proposed that social media didn't create emptiness, it commodified it. The platforms offered a salve for urban isolation, workplace alienation, and the unraveling of traditional communities. When he wrote that loneliness would become the oil of the digital economy, he foresaw the rise of engagement metrics that profit from keeping users restless and insecure. A 2023 Harvard study confirmed this, revealing that people who deactivate Facebook report higher life satisfaction, but most reactivate within months, unable to sever the tether. The cruel irony: Roth's article vanished into the internet's memory hole, overshadowed by breathless coverage of Facebook's IPO and Twitter's role in the Arab Spring. Even he couldn't anticipate how thoroughly these tools would reshape politics, from Cambridge Analytica's micro-targeting to the wildfire spread of QAnon. But that's the hallmark of every great prediction. It's never just about the technology. It's about the cracks in human nature that technology widens. And as we now agree on terms of service we don't read, chasing the next hit of algorithmic approval, we're living the future Wired warned us about, one where the price of connection is the very attention we need to question it. In 2010, as most of the world was still marveling at cat videos and shaky smartphone clips, a small tech blog called Dangerous Harvest dropped a warning that sounded like paranoid science fiction. Their article, bluntly titled "The Coming Fake Video Apocalypse," described a near future where artificial intelligence could generate hyper-realistic footage of anyone saying or doing anything without their knowledge or consent. At the time, the most advanced video manipulation required Hollywood-level CGI budgets and teams of specialists. Yet the blog's anonymous author laid out a terrifyingly accurate timeline. Within a decade, they claimed, open-source tools would let amateurs create undetectable forgeries with nothing but a home computer and a few sample images. To readers in 2010, this seemed like alarmist nonsense, but by 2020, when a viral video of Mark Zuckerberg boasting about controlling stolen data turned out to be entirely fabricated, that obscure prediction had morphed into front-page news. What sets this forecast apart isn't just its technical accuracy, it's how precisely it anticipated the cultural fallout. The blog didn't just describe deepfake technology, it predicted the erosion of public trust that would follow. When video evidence becomes unreliable, the author wrote, we'll enter a world where seeing is no longer believing. That exact crisis now plays out daily, from manipulated political speeches to fake celebrity endorsements. Even more haunting, the article flagged how these tools would first be weaponized against women, citing early experiments with face-swapping pornographic videos, a grim prophecy fulfilled by 2016 when Reddit forums flooded with non-consensual deepfake nudes of actresses and streamers. The real brilliance of the warning lay in its grasp of AI's exponential curve. While most futurists focused on benign applications like medical diagnostics or self-driving cars, Dangerous Harvest zeroed in on the dark side of democratized machine learning. The author noted that image generation models improved fastest when trained on human faces, precisely why deepfakes advanced so rapidly compared to other AI domains. They even predicted the arms race between forgery and detection tools, correctly foreseeing that fakery would always stay one step ahead. Today, as AI-generated voices clone loved ones in scam calls and fake news anchors spread propaganda, that prediction feels less like speculation and more like a roadmap we've been helplessly following. Yet the most unsettling part of this story isn't the technology itself, it's how little anyone did to prepare. The blog's author pleaded for preemptive safeguards, watermarking authentic media, developing verification standards, even outlawing certain uses of the tech before it went mainstream. None of it happened. By the time lawmakers held their first hearings on deepfakes in 2019, the tools were already in the wild, proliferating faster than legislation could chase them. That delay underscores a pattern we've seen throughout these predictions. The future doesn't wait for permission. It arrives whether we're ready or not, leaving us to clean up the consequences. So why did this obscure blog get it so right when so many experts missed the threat? Perhaps because its author wasn't dazzled by AI's potential. They were focused on human nature. They understood that any tool capable of creating art could also forge lies, and that in a world hungry for viral content, the line between them would blur long before we noticed. Now, as AI-generated images muddy historical records and complicate court evidence, we're left grappling with a question the blog posed 14 years ago. When reality itself becomes programmable, what's left to believe in? The answer, it seems, is whatever we're willing to fight to protect. 5 years before the words social distancing entered our daily vocabulary, a little-known science fiction novel sketched out a global catastrophe with unsettling precision. In The Last Town on Earth by Thomas Mullen, published in 2015, a deadly virus sweeps across the planet, forcing towns into isolation, shuttering businesses, and turning masked grocery runs into high-stakes missions. The parallels to COVID-19 are so precise they border on eerie. Fear of asymptomatic carriers sparking community paranoia, debates over lockdown effectiveness dividing neighbors, even makeshift morgues overflowing as healthcare systems buckle. What makes this story remarkable isn't just its accidental foresight. It's how Mullen captured the human dimensions of pandemic life long before the rest of us lived it. Mullen's fictional plague, dubbed the Spanish Flu Reborn, mirrors COVID's ruthless efficiency. His characters grapple with the same impossible choices we faced. A cafe owner weighing financial ruin against public safety, exhausted nurses rationing ventilators, conspiracy theorists dismissing the threat until it's too late. But here's where the novel cuts deepest. It predicted the psychological toll of isolation before Zoom fatigue became a buzzword. One chapter depicts a teenager's mental health unraveling after months without school or friends, while another shows a marriage cracking under the strain of 24/7 togetherness. These weren't throwaway subplots, they were canaries in the coal mine, warning of crises that would dominate therapist offices and emergency rooms by 2021. The most haunting detail, Mullen's fictional town of Commonwealth tries to wall itself off entirely, a drastic measure that backfires when outsiders break quarantine. This exact scenario played out repeatedly during COVID, from Australians circling infected apartment blocks with police tape to Italian villages erecting roadblocks. The novel even includes a subplot about vigilantes enforcing lockdowns at gunpoint, foreshadowing real-life clashes over mask mandates and vaccine passports. Yet for all its grim accuracy, The Last Town wasn't inspired by epidemiology. Mullen based his story on historical accounts of the 1918 flu pandemic, proving that history doesn't just rhyme, it sometimes loops back with terrifying symmetry. What separates this from other predictive fiction is its emotional granularity. Unlike pandemic thrillers that focus on scientists racing for a cure, Mullen zeroes in on ordinary people making agonizing moral calculations. A scene where residents vote whether to turn away a starving refugee could have been lifted from 2020 town hall debates about essential workers. Another passage describes the surreal dissonance of sunny skies during catastrophe, a detail millions recognized during COVID spring when birdsong replaced traffic noise. These moments resonate because they're not about the virus itself, but how it refracts through human relationships and societal cracks we didn't know existed. Critics might argue Mullen simply recycled century-old public health strategies, making his predictions inevitable. But that's precisely what chills, the realization that pandemic responses follow patterns as reliable as gravity. We had blueprints for lockdowns, supply chain failures, and even anti-mask movements buried in history books and fiction alike. The real tragedy isn't that someone predicted our crisis. It's that we ignored countless warnings until the sirens were blaring in our own streets. Mullen's novel now reads less like fiction and more like a rehearsal we slept through, an uncomfortable truth about how often the future leaves clues if only we're willing to see them. From Da Vinci's flying machines to Orwell's telescreens, from Tesla's wireless visions to the Simpsons' Trump presidency joke, history is littered with predictions that seemed laughable until reality caught up. What unites these 30 astonishing forecasts isn't just their accuracy, it's the boldness of minds who dared to imagine beyond the limits of their time. Think about it, Jules Verne plotted the moon landing before airplanes existed. H.G. Wells described atomic bombs when radium was still a lab curiosity. A 19th-century satirist sketched road rage decades before traffic jams became routine. Time and again, the impossible proved inevitable, not because these thinkers had crystal balls, but because they understood the trajectories of human ingenuity and folly. Yet here's the twist: for every prediction that came true, countless others were dismissed as nonsense until they weren't. The critics who mocked Bell's solar panels or scoffed at popular mechanical brains, weren't fools, they were prisoners of their era's assumptions. That's the real lesson hiding in these stories. The future doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It creeps in disguised as fantasy, waiting for the world to wake up to its possibility. Right now, someone's crazy idea, lab-grown organs, asteroid mining, emotion reading AI, is being scribbled in a notebook or debated in a garage, and decades from now we'll look back stunned that we ever doubted it. So here's your challenge: look around at today's wildest predictions with fresh eyes. When you hear about neural implants or quantum internet, don't just dismiss them as sci-fi. Ask yourself, what if we're the ones underestimating the arc of progress? History's greatest innovations always begin as daydreams scribbled at the edges of convention. The real magic lies in recognizing which daydreams are quietly plotting their path into reality, even if the rest of us aren't ready to see it yet. Now it's your turn. Drop a comment below with the most mind-blowing historical prediction you've encountered, or share a modern idea you think might just be the next eerie forecast. And if you're hungry for more glimpses into the uncanny foresight of the past, hit that subscribe button, because the next time someone calls a prediction impossible, we'll be here to unpack how often impossible is just a temporary condition, one that the future loves to prove wrong.